My name is Renata Solberg. I'm 34 years old. And the morning I found out, I was doing something as ordinary as making coffee. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't even fully awake yet. I was standing at the kitchen counter in my old college sweatshirt, scrolling through my phone the way you do when your brain hasn't caught up to your body yet. Just moving my thumb, not really seeing anything. And then the algorithm, which has no loyalty to anyone, handed me a profile I had never seen before. A public account. A username built from a version of my husband's middle name. And the most recent post on that account was a photograph of my sister, wearing my wedding dress, in what looked like my bedroom, smiling like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. I set my mug down on the counter. I didn't drop it. I didn't make a sound. I just set it down very carefully, the way you handle something when your hands have gone strange on you. And I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because I collapsed, because the floor felt like the only honest place to be in that moment. I scrolled backward through that account for a long time. 11 posts, 6 months, and every single one of them was a door I had not known existed in my own life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're going to understand what this actually was, what it cost, and what I did about it, I need to take you back to before that Sunday morning. Back to the beginning of something I didn't know how to beginning. Before I do that, if you're already feeling something watching this, if something about those first 30 seconds already sat wrong in your stomach, I want you to stay with me. Like this video, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely want to know. I'll be right here when you get back. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, western edge of the city, the kind of neighborhood where the houses are close together and everyone knows which families are loud and which ones are quiet. We were quiet. My dad worked shifts at the paper mill, steady, reliable, not a man who said much, but a man who showed up. My mom, Diane, was the warm one. She held the house together with the particular kind of love that expresses itself through feeding people and never complaining out loud about the cost of things. There were 2 of us, me and my sister Petra, 5 years younger. And here is the thing about growing up as the older one in a family like ours. Nobody assigns you the role of the responsible one. It just happens. It accumulates. You handle one thing, and then another, and then one day you look around and realize that handling things has become your entire identity. My mother didn't do it on purpose. She did it because I was capable, and Petra needed more cushioning, and it was easy to let the capable one absorb more because she never seemed to buckle. I buckled. I just did it in private. Petra was bright and easy and warm in a way that made people want to be near her. I was the one who made sure the thing ran. You know the difference. The person who lights up the room and the person who made sure the room was ready before anyone arrived. I was 22 before I understood that those were not equivalent contributions, and that the world rewards the first kind and takes the second kind for granted. And if you have ever been the second kind, if you have ever been the easy one, the capable one, the one everyone assumed was fine precisely because no one was looking closely enough, I think you already know where this story goes. Not the specific details, but the feeling underneath them. That particular loneliness of being relied on and unseen at the same time. If that's landing somewhere real for you right now, hit that like button, subscribe so you're here for the rest of this, and share it with someone who would understand. Now let me keep going. I moved through my 20s carefully. I graduated from UMD on a partial scholarship and worked 20 hours a week at the campus library to cover the rest. I paid my own loans off by 31. I remember the exact day because I sat in my car after making the final payment and called my mom, and she said, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey," and then immediately told me about something Petra was dealing with. I held the phone away from my ear for a second. Just a second. Then I said, "Yeah, sounds hard," and let it go. I had a relationship in my mid-20s that I don't talk about much. A man named Brett who was charming in every room except the ones where it was just the two of us. I was 27 when I finally understood that "he's so great" and "he makes me feel invisible" are not contradictions. One is the performance and one is the truth. I ended it. I drove myself to an empty parking lot and I cried for 40 minutes, and then I drove home and I made a list of everything I wanted my life to actually look like. I still have that list somewhere. I met Colin at 28. He was funny in a way that didn't require an audience. He made me feel chosen, not convenient, not easy, but specifically, deliberately chosen. We got married when I was 31, on a Saturday in October, at a small venue with exposed brick and candles on every table. My dress was ivory, lace-sleeved, fitted through the bodice. I felt exactly like myself in it. That matters. It will matter later. Miriam came to the wedding. Miriam has been in my life since sophomore year of college, and she is the kind of friend who tells you true things without softening them first. When I introduced her to Colin that night, she shook his hand and held my eyes for just a beat longer than normal, and something in that look said, "I am paying attention to this person. If you need me to tell you what I find, I will." I didn't need her to then. 4 months ago, this is important, Petra called me on a Tuesday afternoon. She was seeing someone seriously, she said. Things were getting real. And then, "You know your wedding dress is just sitting in a box. Don't you think it should actually be worn?" She said it warmly, casually, the way you say something you've thought about and decided is reasonable. And I said yes, because she was my sister. Because I had pulled her out of ice when she was 6 years old, and I had never stopped believing that made her worth protecting. I drove the dress to her apartment, hung it on her closet door, hugged her goodbye. I drove home feeling generous, proud of myself for the generosity. That pride is the part that costs me the most when I think about it now. Because when I found that account on a Sunday morning 4 months later and scrolled back through 11 posts, I found a photograph from 9 months ago. 9 months. A rooftop bar 2 cities over. Colin and Petra at a table, a drink in each hand, tagged location visible, grinning at the camera like people who have not yet learned to be careful. She had asked for that dress knowing. She had sat in my living room with a cup of my tea in her hands, and she had asked me for my wedding dress with the full knowledge of what was already happening between her and my husband. And I had handed it to her and felt proud of myself for doing it. I sat on that kitchen floor for a very long time. And then I started taking screenshots. I took screenshots of everything. Every post. Every tagged location. Every timestamp. I did it methodically, the way I do everything when I am in a situation my emotions cannot afford to run. My hands were steady. That's the thing people don't understand about the way I go quiet in a crisis. It isn't calm. It is something that looks exactly like calm from the outside and feels like a controlled demolition on the inside. I was taking screenshots while some part of me was still sitting in an October venue with candles on every table, and I just didn't let that part speak yet. I called Miriam at 10:14 in the morning. I didn't say I need you. I said, "Can you come over? Don't call first, just come." She arrived 22 minutes later, still in her brunch clothes. A burnt orange wrap top, dark trousers, large gold earrings catching the light when she walked through my door. She had been in the middle of something. She came anyway. She set her bag down on my kitchen table like she was setting down a tool she intended to use, looked at my face, and said, "Show me." I showed her. She scrolled through everything without speaking. Miriam is a senior case manager at a family law firm. She has seen a version of every story that exists. But she went through that account the way you go through something that matters personally, not professionally. Slowly, with her jaw set. When she put the phone down, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long do you need to be sure before you do anything?" I said, "I'm already sure. I need to be protected." Something shifted in her face when I said that. Not surprise, recognition. She told me later it was the moment she knew I was going to be okay. Not because the situation was okay, because I already understood the difference between being certain and being safe, and I was asking for the right thing. We spent 3 hours at that kitchen table. Miriam walked me through documentation the way she walks her clients through it. Systematic, thorough, nothing left to feeling. We cross-referenced every post on the account against dates when Colin had told me he was somewhere specific. A showing, a work dinner, a weekend away to reset. We found 7 discrepancies. 7 times in 6 months when the account showed one location and Colin had told me another. She wrote them down in a column on a piece of paper she took from her bag. She dated it and signed the bottom. Then she pushed it across the table to me and said, "That's yours. Keep it somewhere he can't find it." I folded it in half and put it in the inside pocket of my work bag, which I keep in a closet Colin never opens. Here is what I want you to understand about those 7 dates on that piece of paper. It wasn't the number that broke something open in me. It was the specific ones. A Wednesday in September, when Colin told me he had worked late and brought home Thai food, and asked me how my day was and listened to my answer. A Saturday in November, when I had been sick with a bad cold, and he had gone out to get me cold medicine from the pharmacy and come back an hour later with the medicine and a coffee from the place I like. Those weren't absences. Those were performances. Tender, specific, careful performances conducted by someone who had somewhere else to be and still came home and played the part completely. I think about what it takes to do that, to hold 2 lives simultaneously and be present in both of them. Most people, when they imagine betrayal, imagine a person who checks out, distant, irritable, obviously elsewhere. Colin was not elsewhere. He was exactly here, attentive and warm, right up until the moment the algorithm on a Sunday morning decided I had seen enough. I wonder if you've ever discovered that someone you trusted had built an entire second version of their life that you weren't in. Not a suspicion, a discovery. The specific, airless moment when you realize that what you thought was your shared reality was only ever half of one. If you've been there, drop it in the comments. Tell me what that moment felt like for you. I read every single one, and I want to know. Colin came home at 4 that afternoon. I had made dinner. I don't fully remember deciding to make dinner. I think my hands needed something to do. He came through the door in his weekend version of himself, light blue Oxford shirt untucked, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and I noticed a watch on his wrist that I didn't recognize. A nicer one than anything he'd mentioned buying. I noticed it the way you notice something when you are suddenly looking at a person with completely different eyes. All the details that were invisible before becoming suddenly, sharply visible. He said, "Something smells good." I said, "Pasta. How was the showing?" He said, "Fine. Client seems interested." Then he went to wash his hands and came back and sat down, and I passed him the bread and he took it, and we ate dinner together in our kitchen, in our house, and he had no idea that I had spent the last 6 hours building a record of everything he had done. I have thought about that dinner many times since. How ordinary it was. How the food tasted like food, and the conversation was about regular things, and how nothing in his face or his body told me he was a man eating dinner across from a woman who had already decided what came next. Either he was a genuinely exceptional liar, or he had told himself a version of events so convincingly that his guilt had become background noise he had learned to live with. I genuinely do not know which one is worse. Over the next 11 days, I did 4 things. I went to my bank on a Tuesday during my lunch break and opened a personal savings account in my name only. The teller was a young woman with a name tag that said Becca, and she was efficient and cheerful and did not ask me any questions I couldn't answer. I transferred a portion of my personal savings into it, money I had earned, money that had always been in my name, and I drove back to work and ate a sandwich at my desk and answered 17 emails, and nobody knew anything had changed. I made an appointment with a family law attorney. Not Miriam's firm, a different one across town, a woman named Adrian whose office smelled like good coffee and had diplomas on the wall and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. I told her what I had. She looked at the documentation, asked 4 precise questions, and told me I had been unusually thorough for someone who had been sitting with this for less than 2 weeks. I told her I've always kept records. I just didn't know what they were for. I called my mother in Duluth, not to tell her. I wasn't ready to give her that yet. Wasn't ready for the way she would absorb it and make it something she needed to manage and carry it differently than I was carrying it. I called her just to hear her voice. She talked about her garden and a neighbor who had gotten a new dog and something Petra had said to her recently that she'd found funny. I let her talk. I sat in my parked car in the work garage and listened to my mother's voice and reminded myself what unconditional felt like, even secondhand, even when the person delivering it didn't know they were doing it. And then I found the 4th thing, the thing I had missed in my first scroll through the account because I had been so focused on the dress, on the bedroom, on the most recent posts. Buried 9 posts back, a photo from 9 months ago, before Petra ever called me about the dress, before any conversation about anything, a rooftop bar in a city 2 hours from here. Colin and Petra at a small table, drinks in hand, tagged location still visible, grinning at the camera like people who are not yet careful enough to know they need to be. 9 months ago. Petra had asked for the dress 5 months ago. 4 months passed between those 2 dates. 4 months during which my sister came to my house for dinner twice, called me on a random Tuesday afternoon to ask how I was doing, borrowed $40 for something she said was a parking ticket, and ultimately sat across from me in my own living room and asked me for my wedding dress. She asked for it knowing. She planned the ask, constructed it as a reasonable, warm, sisterly request, sat in my space, used my warmth, took the thing that was most specifically mine, the physical object most charged with what my marriage was supposed to mean, and she took it home and put it on and let Colin photograph her in it. I sat with that for a long time before I did anything. 11 days. And on the 12th day, I asked Colin to sit down. I placed my phone on the table between us. I didn't say anything at first. I just put it there, screen up. The account open to the first post. Petra in my bedroom, in my dress, with her hair pinned up and a pearl earring catching the light. I watched Colin's face. I had been watching his face for 11 days without him knowing I was watching, cataloging every micro-expression, every small inconsistency between what his face said and what his mouth said. So I was watching carefully when his eyes landed on the screen. The first thing that moved was his jaw, a slight tightening. Then his eyes came up to mine, and I saw the 4 seconds I will never forget. 4 full seconds in which I watched a man decide which version of himself to be. Whether to deny immediately, to perform confusion, to reach for me with concern. I watched him sort through the options, the way you watch someone shuffle cards. And then I watched him choose. He said, "I can explain this." I said, "I know you can. I've been waiting 12 days for you to explain it without being asked." He didn't have an answer for that. The card he'd chosen didn't work for the hand I was playing, and he knew it. And for just a moment, he looked genuinely young in a way I hadn't seen since we were dating. Unguarded, caught, the performance dropped all the way down to the floor. But I didn't let that move me. Not yet. I had spent 11 days making sure I could sit in this exact moment without being moved. I told him I had already spoken to a lawyer. I told him I had documentation going back 6 months. I told him I was not interested in a conversation that evening, and that he should make arrangements to stay somewhere else while I figured out what came next. I said all of this quietly, in the same register I use when I am explaining a project timeline to a client. Measured. Finished. He tried twice to say something, and I let him try, and then I looked at him steadily until the attempts ran out. He left that night with a bag. He didn't slam the door. I'll give him that. I stood in the kitchen after I heard his car pull out of the driveway, and I pressed my back against the counter, and I breathed. Just breathed. The house was completely quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. Not the quiet of someone being out for the evening, but a different texture entirely. A silence that knew something had changed. I called Miriam. She picked up on the first ring and didn't ask how it went. She just said, "I'm here." That was all I needed. I did not call Petra that night. I gave myself one night of not having done it yet. I made tea, I sat on the couch, I watched something on television that I could not tell you anything about, and I let myself exist in the last few hours before my sister knew that I knew. Because once I made that call, there was no version of my family that stayed the same. I was fully aware of what I was about to permanently alter, and I wanted one more night before I altered it. I called her the next morning at 9. She answered on the second ring, warm and easy, the way she always sounds. "Hey, what's up?" I said. "I saw the photos, Petra. I've seen the account. I've seen the one from the rooftop bar 9 months ago. And I know you asked for the dress knowing." The silence that followed was not like Colin's silence. Colin's silence was calculation. I could feel him working inside it. Petra's silence was different. It was the sound of a person who has been running a story in their own head for long enough that they have started to believe it, suddenly confronted with someone who has read the original. There was something almost like relief in it, which is the thing I will carry the longest. Like some part of her had been waiting to be caught. Like the performance had been exhausting in a way she hadn't admitted even to herself. Then she said, "It's not what you think." And I said, "I'll give you the same courtesy you gave me. None." And I hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after. Then I put it face down on the counter and went and got in the shower and stood under the water for a long time. I cried in there. Properly. Finally. The kind of crying that has been waiting behind a dam for 11 days and comes out as something close to physical. I cried for the dress. I cried for the rooftop bar photograph, and the 4 months, and the Tuesday phone call, and the $40 for a parking ticket. I cried for the 11-year-old version of me who pulled my sister out of ice and decided in that moment that her life was partly mine to protect. I cried for how long I had been paying the interest on that decision without anyone ever telling me I had the right to stop. And then the water went cold, and I got out, and I dried off, and I got dressed for work. This is the part I need you to understand. This is the moment I want you to sit with, because it is the thing about this story that I think matters most, more than the confrontation and more than what came after. It is a quiet moment. It happened in my bathroom on a Thursday morning, with cold water still on my collarbone. I looked at my left hand, my wedding ring. I had worn it for 3 years without ever not wearing it. It had become part of the texture of my hand, something I felt the absence of in the same unconscious way you'd feel the absence of a sound you'd stopped noticing. I looked at it for a long time. Then I reached up and unclasped my mother's gold chain from my neck, the thin one with the small pendant, the one I never take off either, and I refastened it around my wrist instead, where I could feel it against my pulse. And I left the ring on the bathroom counter. I didn't make a production of it. I didn't photograph it. I didn't send it to anyone. I just left it there and walked out of the bathroom and went to work. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, if something about that moment, the ring on the counter and the chain moved to the wrist, if something about a woman quietly choosing what she keeps and what she sets down, if that landed somewhere in you that you weren't expecting, I just want to say, stay with me. Hit that like button. Subscribe, because what comes next is the part that changed everything. I need you here for it. The divorce filing was 16 days after I found the account. Adrian, my lawyer, the one with the reading glasses on a chain, told me the documentation I had assembled was unusually thorough. I told her I had always been the kind of person who keeps records. She nodded without sentimentality and said, "That's going to serve you well here." Colin did not contest the separation. I found that out through Adrian, and I sat with it for a moment when she told me. Not relief exactly, more like recognition. Of course he didn't. Contesting it would have required him to argue, and arguing would have required him to look directly at what he had done. Colin had never been able to look directly at difficult things. He managed them sideways, through absence and silence, and the particular cowardice of a man who believes that not saying something is the same as not doing it. He moved into an extended stay hotel first. Then, within 6 weeks, a rental near Petra's neighborhood. I learned that from Miriam, who had heard it from a mutual acquaintance. She told me on a phone call, matter-of-factly, watching my reaction in the pause after. I said, "Okay," and then, "Does it bother me more that he moved close to her, or that it surprises me less than it should?" Miriam said, "Neither. It tells you what you already knew." She was right. It told me nothing new. It just made the geometry of it visible, the shape of the thing they'd been building while I was in the same house, making coffee, taking screenshots. What I was not prepared for was my mother. I had been managing that conversation in my head for weeks. How to tell her, what words to use, how much detail to give before she became overwhelmed and needed to be managed herself. I had planned it carefully, the way I plan everything. And then she called me on a Thursday evening before I had executed a single part of my plan, and she said, "Petra told me her version. I want yours." Just like that, no preamble, no softening. Petra told me her version. I want yours. I told her mine. All of it. The account, the rooftop photograph from 9 months ago, the dress, the 12 days of silence while I built my case. I told it in order, without editorializing, the same way I had told Adrian. Because by then, I had told it enough times that I knew which words to use, and I knew where my voice would hold and where I needed to move quickly before it didn't. When I finished, my mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You pulled her out of that ice, and she spent 30 years figuring out what to take from you." I didn't say anything. She said, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I made you responsible for her. I'm sorry I made you responsible for her." I had not known I was waiting for that sentence. I had not written it on any list or included it in any plan or told Miriam I needed it. I didn't know it existed as something that could be given to me until it was given to me. And then I understood that I had been waiting for it since I was 11 years old, standing at the edge of a frozen pond. I cried again. On the phone with my mother this time. And she let me, and she didn't try to fix it or reframe it or make it easier. She just stayed on the line and said, "I know, sweetheart, I know." That was the thing that cracked me open all the way. Not the account, not the dress, not the rooftop photograph. My 63-year-old mother staying on the line and finally, seeing the right thing. The consequences came without my help. That is the thing I want to say first, before anything else about what happened after. I did not engineer what came next for Colin and Petra. I did not make calls or send messages or engineer any version of public exposure. I filed my paperwork, I worked with Adrian, I kept my life running, and I let the truth be the thing that did what truth does when it is finally allowed to move freely. Colin's firm found out. Not from me. From the account itself, someone who knew Colin professionally had stumbled across it the same way I had, through the particular democracy of a public profile, and the story traveled the way stories travel in professional circles. Quietly at first, then everywhere at once. I heard about it secondhand, through a woman named Jess who had worked briefly with Colin 2 years ago and still called me occasionally. She told me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice careful, watching the edges of what I might feel. I said, "Thank you for telling me." I meant it. I didn't feel anything that resembled satisfaction. I felt tired, the way you feel when something you already knew becomes something everyone else knows. Not vindication, just the weight of it finally being shared. Petra's Instagram account, the lifestyle one, the one with the modest following and the carefully curated aesthetic of ease, lost nearly half its followers in the space of 2 weeks after the story circulated through enough mutual connections that it became impossible to not know. She posted nothing for almost a month. When she came back, the tone was different, more careful. The particular brightness gone, replaced with something flatter that tried to look like growth. I didn't follow it. Miriam told me about it because Miriam is the kind of friend who believes in keeping you informed so you are never caught off guard by anything, which is its own form of love. My parents drove down to see me on a Saturday in late winter. Just the two of them, no warning beyond a call the day before. My dad came in, hung his coat on the hook by the door the way he always does, looked around my kitchen and said, "Place looks good." For my father, that was a declaration. He sat at my kitchen table and drank the coffee I made him and talked about the drive and the weather and a problem with the gutters at the house in Duluth, and he didn't mention Petra or Colin once. Not because he didn't know, because he was there for me, and he understood that being there for me meant filling my kitchen with ordinary things. My mother held me for a long time when she arrived. Not the quick, reflexive hug of hello, a real one, the kind that acknowledges something. She pulled back and looked at my face and said, "You look like yourself." I didn't know what that meant at first. Then I did. Petra did not come. She was not invited. The boundary was not negotiated, and it was not explained in a family meeting, and there was no conversation about what it would take for things to be different. It simply was what it was, and my parents accepted it without requiring me to justify it. My father, because he was not a man who required justification for things that were self-evident. My mother, because she had said what she needed to say on that Thursday phone call, and she understood that I had heard her, and that we had, between us, settled something that had needed settling for a very long time. There were 2 people who came back to me during those months who surprised me. The first was an old friend from college, a woman named Dara who had drifted out of my life in the way people drift when years get busy and distance gets wide. She had heard what happened through the network of people who knew us both, and she sent me a message that said simply, "I should have stayed in better touch. I'm sorry I didn't. Can we talk?" We talked for 2 hours on a video call on a Sunday afternoon, and what struck me was that she didn't perform sympathy. She just treated me like a person she was glad to know again. which was exactly what I needed and hadn't thought to ask for. The second was Colin's older sister, a woman named Ruth, who I had always liked and who had always seemed, at family gatherings, to be watching her brother with the particular wariness of someone who has known a person their whole life and understands their weak points completely. Ruth sent me a card, a physical card, in the mail, with a stamp and my address in her handwriting. It said, "I have no right to ask you for anything, and I'm not asking. I just wanted you to know that what happened was wrong, and that I know it was wrong. I'm sorry it happened in my family." I kept that card. I put it in the drawer of my bedside table, and I have not moved it since. The people who did not come back I accepted without bitterness. Not without sadness. There is a difference. Bitterness is what happens when you keep the wound open by needing the people who hurt you to acknowledge it. Sadness is just the honest weight of loss, and loss is real, and I was not going to pretend it wasn't. I wrote a letter. I wrote it at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning. The same table, the same kitchen, the same hour of the same kind of pale winter light that had been coming through that window when I found the account. I did that deliberately. I wanted to write it in the same place, at the same time, because I wanted to feel the distance between that Sunday and this one. I wanted to sit inside the proof that I had moved. I did not send the letter to Colin. I did not send it to Petra. I wrote it for myself, not as performance and not as processing and not as a thing I intended to share with anyone. I wrote it because I am a person who has always kept records, and this was the record I needed to exist, a document that said, in my own words, in my own handwriting, what had happened and what I had done about it, and who I was on the other side of it. The central thing I wrote, the line I came back to, the one I crossed out and rewrote 3 times before I got it right, was this. The most dangerous thing I ever did was make myself easy to take for granted. And the bravest thing I ever did was stop. I read it to Miriam that evening. We were on the phone, and I read it to her the way you read something to a person whose opinion is the one that matters. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she said, "That's exactly right." Just that. No elaboration, no addition. That's exactly right. Which is the most Miriam thing she could possibly have said, and it was perfect. I kept the house. I renegotiated the mortgage in my name alone. Adrian helped me navigate it, methodically, the way she navigated everything. I put the settlement into the savings account I had opened on that Tuesday lunch break, the one Becca the teller had set up for me while being cheerful and asking no difficult questions. I did not tell anyone the amount. It was mine, and it did not need to be shared or explained or made comfortable for anyone else to know. On a Saturday in early spring, I packed the last of Colin's things into a box. I had been setting things aside for weeks, not urgently, not angrily, just steadily, the way you complete a task that needs completing. A book from his nightstand, a coffee mug he'd had since before we met, some things from the garage. I taped the box and put it on the porch and texted him the address and told him it would be there. He came while I was at work. When I got home, the porch was empty. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, just stood there, in the quiet, in the particular quality of afternoon light that comes through the window at that time of year, pale gold, unhurried, falling across the counter in a stripe. I made coffee. I stood at the counter with the mug in my hands, and I looked at the kitchen the way you look at something you are finally ready to see clearly. It was mine, this kitchen, this house, this quiet, all of it, mine. I thought about Petra, not with anger, not anymore. I thought about her the way you think about a person who was real to you, and complicated, and who chose something that made their realness beside the point. I thought about the version of her that was 6 years old and cold and scared at the edge of a pond, and I thought, I would still have pulled her out. That's the thing. Even knowing everything, the 11-year-old version of me would have reached into that water without hesitating. Because that is who I am. That is actually who I am. And the fact that she used it does not change who I am. It only tells me who she is. I am Renata Solberg. I am 34 years old, and I finally know what it feels like to stand in a room that is completely mine and feel exactly like myself inside it. Before you go, I want to ask you something. I've been thinking about it all the way through telling this story. Has someone ever used your love for them as the specific tool they needed to hurt you? Not indifference, love. The door you left open because you trusted them, and the fact that you left it open because of who you are, not because you were naive. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know what you carry. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt true to something you've lived or something you've watched someone you love go through, hit that like button, subscribe so you're here for the next one, and share it with someone who needs to hear that being the capable one, the easy one, the one who holds things together, that is not the same as being the one who deserves less. It was never the same thing. And if nobody has told you that clearly enough yet, I hope this was the day they did.